Week 14 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few wide receivers. I have his sleepers this week. The first receiver, Ray McCloud of the Atlanta Falcons. McCloud out there in 85% of fantasy leagues, and he's been a solid number 3 wideout this season for this Atlanta Falcon team. In 3 out of the last 4 games, he's had double-digit fantasy points. Week 9 versus the Cowboys, 3 catches, 28 yards, a touchdown, a carry, 7 yards. Week 10 at the Saints, a carry, 6 yards, 3 catches, 30 yards. Week 11 at the Broncos, 6 catches, 46 yards. And Week 13 versus the Chargers, 4 catches, 95 yards on 6 targets. So this week, a good matchup at the Vikings. I know overall this Viking defense is good, but in terms of giving up points to wide receivers, a lot of garbage time and a lot of empty yards, though it's been. They give up the most fantasy points to receivers on the season. So McCloud, we know he's a deep ball threat. We know a good yard after catch, speedy wide out. And Kirk Cousins, we know he's a quarterback that spreads the football out. So this week, if you need a deep sleeper, McCloud, like I said, out there in tons of fantasy leagues at 85%, and definitely someone you could use as a sleeper option in deeper leagues this week. The next receiver, Brandon Cooks of the Dallas Cowboys, went off injury last week. 3 catches, 16 yards, a touchdown on 7 targets. So back as the number 2 wide receiver over Jalen Tolbert is Brandon Cooks. And this is a good ball game on paper where the Bengals can't stop anyone, giving up the 11th most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. So Cooks, I know his best years are behind him, but he's still a wide receiver from time to time that could go out there and I believe put points on the board. But definitely another wide out that's a deep sleeper available in 88% of fantasy leagues. So this is a ball game where the Cowboys could be chasing points, or it could just be an up and down, high scoring ball game between these 2 teams. So Brandon Cooks this week, if you're in desperation mode, is a starting wide receiver, and it possibly could be a high scoring game. And the third and final wide receiver I have is a sleeper, is Elijah Moore of the Cleveland Browns. So Elijah Moore last week operating as the number 2 wide receiver for this Brown team. He went off 14 targets, 8 catches, 111 yards in that one where Jameis Winston, what a game it was. Tail with 2 tapes though, 497 passing, 4 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, including 2 pick sixes. But the last 2 out of 3 weeks, he's at 18 or more fantasy points in PPR leagues is Elijah Moore. Week 11 at the Saints, 6 catches, 66 yards, a touchdown. Week 12 versus Steelers in the rematch this week, a couple weeks ago, only 3 catches, 21 yards. In Week 13, like I mentioned, the Broncos, 8 catches, 111 yards on 14 targets. But the thing is, tough matchup. Obviously, it was a snow game a few weeks ago versus Steelers team, but also as well, Cedric Tillman, I believe, possibly could return to the lineup for this Cleveland Brown team. So Elijah Moore, we've seen flashes with him with the New York Jets. We've seen him with the Cleveland Browns, but week in and week out, you just can't count him as a consistent option, but he is out there in 85% of fantasy leagues. If you're in a deep pinch, that's a few wide receivers. I have his sleepers for Week 14 of the fantasy football season.